All right, welcome back and to this, our continuation of our section on relational database theory. How to set these things up such that we can ensure SQL is actually going to work properly once we start writing it. In our last section, we learned about tables and columns and rows and all the rest of the good stuff, relationships. And a reasonable question is, okay, we've got a business enterprise. How do we know what tables and relationships and attributes we need? Well, the answer to that is really pretty straightforward. It's a process known as normalization. And normalization is going to be the topic for our next two lectures. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at normalization prep. That is, what actions and activities do we need to do to get ready for the actual normalization process. And then in the next lecture, we'll actually get down to the nuts and bolts of breaking that information down into tables and relationships. In the last section, you briefly saw an entity relationship diagram for our example database in this course. Let's dig a little deeper and learn more about our example database. Our example business is Grandma and Grandpa's jams, jelly, and moonshine. Yeah, it's just too darn cute, so we're going to have some fun with this. They are elderly individuals living in Appalachia in the United States, the Appalachian Mountains of the United States, and they create and sell jams, jelly, and moonshine. Now, before you jump to stereotypes, let me tell you, it's Grandpa who's actually our cook, and he makes the jams and the jellies, and it's Grandma who's got a little still down by the creek, and she makes our moonshine for us. When they first started out, it was just the two of them taking their product down to the local farmer's market and selling it on Saturday mornings to, as they would have said, get a little cash money in their pockets. Well, the product is so darn good that it quickly took off and sales were going through the roof. Grandma's nephew Frank helped him out at one point and built him a little spreadsheet. So they started tracking all their information on it. Not surprisingly, the computer was a little scary for Grandma and Grandpa originally, but things worked out and they're really doing very well now. So much so that they're ready to start selling their product online. Such is our role to design them a database such that they can run their enterprise going forward. How do we decide what their schema needs to look like? Well, we do what designers refer to as interview the data. We talk to the business owners about how their business runs. And in addition, we review and go through any current documentation that they might have. In our case, nephew Frank's spreadsheet. What's in there? We need to be able to capture all that and also ensure that they're going to be able to grow this business going forward. Let's take a look. All right, we're going to now take a look at the notes I took when I interviewed Grandma and Grandpa regarding their business enterprise. And this is going to very closely mimic some of the activities you'll do when you're designing a database and speaking to the business owners. It's your job to ferret out the entities and all their relationships. Let's take a look. Apparently, Grandma and Grandpa currently sell 5 varieties of jam, 12 varieties of jelly, and of course their world-famous moonshine. When I asked them if this was ever going to change, they indicated that they might add some more types of jam next year if the berries were good. Okay, cool. Any other variations on what you sell? Well, you can get any of our stuff in either a pint or a quart jar. All right, I'm thinking we're getting somewhere now. P.S. For those of you outside the U.S., a pint is approximately a half a liter and a quart's twice that size. We simple Americans simply cannot handle the metric system. Sorry about that. All right, next question. Grandpa, tell me about your customers. Oh, there's this feller Jeff in Cary who buys just about every day. That man can go through some shine. His buddy Dave is pretty thirsty too. Other times people just call us and place an order. We don't care, that's fine. Money spent just as well either way. All right, Grandpa, how do you ship this stuff once you get an order? Oh, we just take it down to the post office and put it in one of those flat rate boxes. Works fine. I don't think we'll ever change that part of the business. Besides, it gives me a chance to say hi to that mail lady down there. I think she's kind of sweet on me, Everything go in the same box? Oh, yeah. Well, unless Granny's short on her shine batch that month, and then we have to ship that separate when her next batch comes in. Do you guys do all the shipping yourselves? Oh, no. Sometimes Grandma's nephew Frank helps us out. Grandma's other nephew, Fred, has offered to help too, but he never showed up. Grandma has 7 nephews, no nieces. Funny how that works that way. All right, great. Anything else I need to know before I go take a first cut at this? Oh, you should probably know that Jeff feller gets some of his shine shipped to his office so his wife doesn't find out. None of my business, of course, if you ask me. That's just the way they work. All right, first, my apologies to the entire population of the Appalachian Mountains of the U.S. That's a terrible stereotype and way overblown. In addition, Jeff and Dave are both good friends of mine, and neither of them are drunks. It's just made for a good story, and we're going to use some of the points there in making additional points going forward. Doesn't really matter. So what did we learn? First off, when you're doing these data interviews, you get a lot of chaff with the wheat. You got to listen hard to really kind of figure out what it is they're trying to say. For example, we don't really care about how many nieces or nephews Grandma's got. But we do care about the fact that Frank and possibly Fred going forward are going to work on their behalf. To me, that sounds like an employee entity. Similarly, Grandpa specifically told us that they put all the product associated with a single order in a single box and ship it off. Except, of course, when Grandma's short on shine, then it has to go in 2 separate shipments. Hey, to me that sounds like a one-to-many relationship between order and shipments, because if you can get us multiple shipments, then that's a many relationship. Next, you kind of have to interpose your own business experience and expertise while listening to this. For example, did you notice that we actually doubled our product count once we found out about the variable sizes jars that they ship in? I mean, Grandpa didn't realize it's what he was telling us. We had to hear that especially. All right, that's a little about interviewing the data. What do you do once that interview process is complete and you've also, of course, studied all the written documentation? Well, you take a first cut at a list of entities and relationships yourself. And then once you've got that list, you bounce that off the potential database owner, or in our case, Grandma and Grandpa, to make certain that it's accurate. Let's take a look at my first cut. Well, obviously, we're going to have a customer entity, and each customer can have 1 or more orders and addresses. All right, that makes sense. We just said customers can have more than 1 address, so we need to have a customer address entity with a many-to-one relationship on the customer. Good enough. Orders. Sure, we'll need an order entity, and we know that each customer can have 1 or more orders. Next, line items, order line items. Neither Grandma or Grandpa mentioned anything about this, but our good old business experience tell us we'll need it. Orders are always broken down into line items with 1 product per line. Okay, we'll add an order line item entity, which is many-to-one with orders and 1-to-1 with products. By the way, did you notice what we're doing here, guys? Not only are we enumerating the entities and their relationships, but we're also starting to think about the degree of those relationships. 1-to-1, one to many, many to many. You get the idea. Okay, next we have our product entity. Notice we have annotated that a product can exist without an order. Many times you're going to have what are known as base tables. These are things that can exist really and are often populated even before the database goes into production. Our product entity is many to one with order and one to one with line item. Next, our shipment entity. Remember, Grandpa told us that everything goes into one box. Well, it's not really true. We also had to hear on our own that really it's a many to one with order. Shipping box entity is real simple and in a one-to-one relationship with shipments. And finally, there's our employee entity. Not sure if we're ever going to use it, but we're going to put it in, make it a one-to-one with shipment at this time, just in case we need it going down the line. Good enough, nice start. Time for us now to go back to Grandma and Grandpa and confirm this information with them. Okay, the confirmation process of entities and relationships. If you talk about entities and relationships in that vocabulary, back to Grandma and Grandpa, they're going to look at you like you're from Mars. You need to be able to translate this information back into their vocabulary to get confirmation that you have it correct. Remember that. All right, next step in the process is to go back through each of those entities and get a potential list of attributes for each entity. That is, what fields of information are we going to need to store and be maintained in our database as associated with each entity? What stuff's going in there? Okay, let's take a look at our list. All right, start again with customers. First, last name, email, telephone number. Cool. Probably going to need others by the time we're done, but that will get us started. Again, attribute list is being absolutely correct is not as important as the entities and relationships at this time because we can easily refine it as we go forward. It's not nearly as easy to refine the entities and relationships. So let's make sure those are right. All right, looks like we're suggesting that each customer address contains a customer, street address, apartment number, city, state or province, postal code and country. Okay, I can buy that. But what is that weird underline notation associated with the customer field? Well, it simply infers that for each address that all the customer attributes will be required. Next, we have an order entity. Again, we see the inclusion of our customer entity and then an order date and 3 fields to hold the total product charges, shipping charges, and overall total. Looks like I've included some annotation indicating that the overall total will probably be calculated. No problem, we'll deal with that when we learn about physical database design a little later on. We're still here working in the logical world. Okay, next we move on to line items. Inclusion of the order and product entities such that makes sense, and then attributes to store the quantity and extended price. Looks good, but remember via transitivity we have actually also included the customer entity in here because it is included in the order entity. Next comes our product. Nothing too surprising here. A couple of attributes to store the name and description, and then some values associated with pricing and inventory. Cool, pretty straightforward stuff. Shipment attribute looks pretty interesting. An included order line item, which of course transitively includes the product, order, and customer entities, a ship date, a box, and a name for the employee who shipped it. Apparently, I've also chosen to add an enumerator for status, which takes one of 2 values, either partial or full. Okay, I can dig that. Our attributes for shipping box looks pretty straightforward. Size stuff, price, yeah, you get it. Finally, there's one employee entity again, standard identification stuff and some contact information, all looks fine. But then we have this manager attribute with employee in parens. The employee annotation is simply to remind me that a manager is really nothing more than another employee. In this case, that employee who manages the current employee. Okay, I can dig that. We're fine. All right, that was fun. We finally got introduced to our example database, and yeah, it's a little goofy, but I hope we can have some fun with it. So, what did we learn in this lecture? Well, we began the normalization process by interviewing the data. Interviewing the data means conducting a rigorous interview regarding entities and relationships with the business owners or the data owners, and then also thoroughly reviewing all documentation with respect to what they're keeping as terms of information right now. All that's going to become important as we move forward. Once we completed that interview process, we produced a preliminary list of entities and relationships, and then we culminated the data interview process by adding attributes to each of those entities. And remember, we go back to the data owners between each of these steps and verify that our interpretation of what we thought we heard was in fact correct. Finally, and probably most importantly, when you're conducting these data interviews, you're going to be responsible for ferreting out the chaff from the wheat. They are going to give you a bunch of stuff you really don't care about. Your job is to listen politely, take enough notes that you can get it all right, and then ultimately feed it back to them using their vocabulary, not ours. Got it now? Sounds like fun. All right, in our next section, we are going to get into the actual normalization process wherein we decide what tables we need and the relationships between those tables. Should be great fun. In the interim, you go out there and have some fun, but keep on learning.